cases, your opponents are going to capture the pawn. Sometimes they'll push the pawn forward, and in a moment I'll tell you what to do in that case. But let's start with the main line, pawn takes. Now, you do not want to recapture because that allows white to bring the knight forward and gain a tempo. Instead, you play knight f6, aiming to get the pawn back without exposing your queen. And now white is at the crossroad. There are basically three main choices. They can either try to hold on to this extra pawn by going c4, or they can use a plain, simple move, knight to c3, which is what beginners often play. Not dangerous, but anyway they do. Finally, there is a move d4, which is what computer recommends, and this is what advanced players play. Let's start with this one, and after that we'll go back to the other alternatives. So here, you recapture the pawn, and after c4, white is trying to gain a tempo, you've got this provocative move, knight to b4. Kind of exposing this knight, inviting white to try to take advantage of this, because at first it looks like you're indeed in trouble. The knight is attacked, so is your king. As you cover, they can go d5, capitalizing on the pin. Now it looks like your knight on c6 is in trouble, and even the other one is in trouble as well, but you have an absolutely mind-boggling refutation. It's the move pawn b5, the move which is very hard to foresee or even to comprehend, and that is why so many players fall into this trap. Now, they'll usually capture it either with the pawn or the queen. Let's say they capture with a pawn, then you play bishop f5, and you aim at this square of c2, normally with a knight, forking his king and rook, so knight c2 is coming. They got a few things to do, but basically they're already lost. For example, if they capture this knight this way, there's also a very interesting way you can play bishop c2 with a very unusual double attack. You attack their queen, but also this d1 square. And if he captures the knight, for example, queen d1 is a sudden checkmate. You kind of replaced his queen by yours. What else can he do? Let's say he captures your knight with the other pawn, but then you execute your main threat, knight c2, forking his king and rook. The king is in check, it needs to move. Let's say it goes here, then you grab a rook, and now you're already ahead in material, plus you hit this knight. You also are about to capture this pawn, and then to attack the king, white is really in trouble. And if white tries to consolidate with knight c3 guarding this pawn, then, you know, they say that a knight on the rim is green, but in this case, he who loves last loves best. Bishop c2 is another unusual double attack, and your knight helps making it happen. Finally, what if your opponent decides to be defensive? He doesn't take your knight at all, but plays knight a3 to cover that weakness on c2 so that you cannot jump there. There is still a nice follow-up. You play queen takes d5, sacrificing your knight right here, and after it's accepted, you have a nice follow-up. Queen e4 checks the king after white covers. Anyhow, you continue with one more check, and here is the trick. It is not just a check, it is also a discovered attack of his queen. That's the whole point. On the next turn, you're going to grab his queen, let's say in this line, and now you have winning material advantage. Your opponent may have a glimpse of hope with bishop takes f5, but not for long, because you counter with another double attack, and now you grab this bishop and you win the game. You're up a queen, you're about to play queen e4 check, attacking the king, attacking all these pawns. Maybe you want to play e6 and grab the knight. All in all, you're just winning. So far we talked about white capturing this pawn by their pawn, but how about queen capturing this pawn? That leads to one of the funniest opening traps ever. You continue with this knight to c2 check, your main idea. This square is no longer covered by the queen, therefore you don't even need to develop your bishop, you can play the knight check straight away. And after the king moves, it still looks like the situation is complex, a lot of pieces are hanging, but there's a beautiful move, bishop d7, which narrows it down basically to just a single variation, which is exactly what you want. What can white play? He cannot take this knight because of knight d4 with this check, double attack, discover attack, and everything. It's just bad for white. Therefore, pawn takes c6 is pretty much forced. And now your opponent hopes for, this capture, but now you go bishop g4. A sudden double check. Alright, therefore the king is forced to play. Now another unpleasant surprise, queen d1. You can replace their queen on d1 by yours, delivering this check. The bishop supports it, therefore the king needs to move. Now you grab a bishop with yet another check. Go into the d file is dangerous. Black is gonna bring up the rook into the attack. If the king goes here, you continue with the roundhouse kick. Another unusual surprise. Somehow your pieces take over the first rank. The king moves right here, and now you continue with e5. This move often starts the game, but of course it's much nicer when it ends the game, such as in this case. Here the trick is you open up this bishop check. And there's no normal way for white to stop this. Your other bishop also takes away the other diagonal. White cannot play b4 because of this pin. Therefore, this check is indeed deadly. Basically, white can resign straight away. I mean, if you want to play it out exactly till the checkmate, it's going to be a couple more moves, but it is still a checkmate. As we have seen, allowing you to keep your knight on b4 is really dangerous for white, therefore some of your opponents will play pawn a3 trying to get rid of this annoying intruder. You just slide it back, and now d5 still looks winning for white. Your knight is pinned, it cannot go, and it's attacked. Knight c5 little counter strike does not seem to help, because after queen b5, not only this knight is still in danger, but now the other knight is in danger just as well. But now you pull off a super duper brilliant move, pawn e5. Now, most players play this move right at the very beginning of a chess game, but in this case you can get a double exclamation mark for it because it's a brilliant move. Here you sacrifice this knight because your plan is to trap the queen. Your knight is doing a good job controlling these two squares, and your idea is to play pawn a6 and capture the queen. Your opponent might figure it out, and after some thinking will play queen b4. Thinking that he's up a knight, he can just retreat his queen and that he's about to win the game, but don't worry, we're gonna keep his ego in check. Alright, now let's talk about the fish in the room. What if your opponent is not seduced by this check, but tries to just play a3, plays very solidly, kicks your knight back, then you retreat. Now this pawn on d4 is still attacked, and if white defends it somehow, you can continue attacking it. Objectively speaking, white is better, but in reality it is still very tricky, and white still needs to be very precise. Plus your position is not bad, I mean, you can play it on, certainly. Now this pawn is hanging, let's say he defends it, you've got e5, this another interesting pawn break to open up the position, to keep attacking. Now what can they do? Like the knight is pinned, therefore the knight cannot take it. He can either capture it with a pawn or push the pawn forward. Capturing is not a good idea, you're gonna take, exposing his king, and then you're gonna pick up this pawn with a great position. So d5 is a stronger option, but in this case you also have this very interesting follow-up. And again, although Stoichfish tells you that white is better, but it's a very complex position, and unless your opponent is at a master level, there's no way he'll figure it out. And the most likely scenario is he's going to capture this knight, and now after a trade of queens, you capture this one on f3, which leads to a great position for you. In fact, you're winning. If white does nothing special, you're going to pick up this pawn, castle queenside with a check, you're up pawn, you're winning. And if your opponent decides to take a chance and say, hey, wait a second, I'm going to capture this pawn, and then I'm going to capture the rook and promote into a new queen, then there's a very nice refutation. You play pawn takes g2 with a sudden discovered check. White needs to do something about that, and then not only you capture a rook and promote a new queen, but you also use this interesting diagonal x-ray of your own rook, which you need for defense. If white now tries to do the same, guess what? It doesn't happen because you've got this queen right there and you have this really long move, queen takes a8, winning the game. To those of you who got excited and went to try it out in Blitz, and your opponent certainly played something different, welcome back into the video. Now we'll talk about the rest of the variations that you need to know. So here so far we're talking about knight f6, aiming to get the pawn back. The most principled move for white is d4, and now you can either go for this knight takes d5 tricky idea that we've been talking about, or if you want something more serious, there is a move bishop g4 known as the Portuguese gambit, which I recommend for more advanced players, or if you don't want to play tricky lines. I've got another video about this, I'll link it down below. Right now let's come back to this position and let's talk about knight c3, the move played by beginners typically. Here the move is not dangerous because you can simply get back your opponent on d5 and now you're already good. Moreover, in most cases they follow up with this trade on d5, and now the position is more or less symmetric, but you have one piece developed, they have nothing, therefore it's kind of like you already are taken over. Now white needs to be careful not to end up in a worse position. And what can happen after that? Well, usually both sides develop, you bring your bishop to g4 at some point, pinning the knight, then you can castle queenside, so that your rook is also active and helps you to put pressure to his central pawn. And after c3 defending the pawn, you can break open the center with e5, and if your opponent tries to take on e5, this is a losing blunder. Nice thing about these all variations is that a lot of natural moves of your opponent are wrong. Your opponent was expecting you to trade queens, but instead you slide your queen here to e4, opening up this discovered attack from your rook. And now once your opponent does whatever with his queen, you capture this pawn on e5. But now you have this monstrous pressure across the central files, and white is already defenseless. You're now attacking this knight on f3. He cannot take on e5 because of this checkmate. Otherwise, what can he do? He also cannot easily castle because then his bishop on e2 is undefended. You're going to simply grab it with your queen, like this, and you're winning. What else can he play? He needs to somehow defend this knight on f3, otherwise you're going to capture it. Maybe he'll try c4 so that his queen gets involved into the defense, but you have zero respect to his defenders. You can go rook d3, one of ways to finish it off, attacking the queen. The rook cannot be captured because the bishop is pinned. And after the queen goes anywhere, now you finally get to this knight on f3, you capture it, the bishop is still pinned, you cannot move, otherwise you recapture with the knight, and then you have this Trojan horse that allows you to win the game. One of the questions that you guys have been asking me about is, what if my opponent does not even take the pawn, but just pushes his pawn forward? In this case, you play c5, controlling the center, controlling this square, and then you aim to play knight c6 to start surrounding and attacking this pawn on e5. And you're getting something similar to the French defense, but a much better version for you. This pawn on e5 is in fact weak. You have this long diagonal for your bishop to be developed. Life's good. In most cases, they play d4, but now you can capture this pawn straight away. After queen recaptures, knight c6 is very strong, putting pressure to his queen and central pawn. They'll try bishop b5. Again, I'm showing you the most played line, pinning your knight down to the king. And in this position, of course, there are different ways to go about this. I love the move bishop d7 because it's a very tricky attempt. You neutralize the pin, and therefore this threat is now real. And in most cases, your opponents will notice that, hey, my queen needs to move, but it can actually capture this pawn. This is what they'll do most of the time. Of course, some of them might simply trade off this knight on c6, which is targeting their queen. In this case, it's great for you. You've got a really strong center. You've got the advantage of two bishops. Life's good. By the way, if you're not sure what I'm talking about, these positional factors, I've got a free masterclass about this. You can click the link below the video and check this out. It's going to help you with that component because really chess is a strategic game. Anyway, back to what we're talking about. Usually they're going to capture this pawn on d5 and be happy. They'll think that you blundered it, but now you continue with e6. You keep gaining tempos, attacking the queen. The queen needs to move somewhere. If it goes somewhere back, you can pick up this pawn on e5. And that is why they play queen e4, trying to put their queen to a safe square and to protect this pawn, but they blunder this strong counter queen a5 with a double attack to their king and bishop. Knight c3 is the only way to try to hold on to this bishop, but now bishop b4, you pile up to this pin and white is still in trouble. One funny line which may really occur here is very often they see that the knight is in danger and they want to support it by going knight e2, but in that case you can simply grab the bishop. Due to the pin, they can now recapture your up a piece, and from here your queen also attacks this pawn on e5 just as well. So let's take that back. If instead they try to get rid of this bishop, which is hanging, because otherwise you want to capture it, either straight away or you want to first trade on c3 with check and then take the bishop. If they want to take here, you could recapture, but it's stronger to play this check because now you take direct aim at their king. And after the trade, this is actually a double attack to his king and rook. That's why I said that I love this variation. Very often you'll end up with this totally winning position. And on the next move, you could take the rook, but here it's even stronger to recapture, saving all the threats that you have. The most usual move they play is queen g4, maybe hoping for some counter attack, but of course it's not going to happen. And by the way, pessimists castle to put their king to safety, but you castle to put his king in danger. And now it's literally a checkmate on the next move. Now we're moving on to the next line, pawn c4, used by people who charge their phone at work to save electricity at home. Here white simply wants to hold on to their extra pawn on d5. And after e6 you undermine it, and although white is up a pawn indeed, you are way ahead in development and you're going to capitalize on that and to develop a quick attack. After d4, temporarily looks like white is doing just fine. Again, he's up a pawn and he's got this beautiful center. However, bishop b4 starts questioning white's position because he's underdeveloped and you wish to attack. He can play knight c3, most natural move, but now knight e4, you keep capitalizing on the same pin and you add more pressure, and after bishop d2, very natural reaction. In this case, however, it drops this pawn on d4. It is no longer defended by the white queen, and therefore you can simply go ahead and capture it. Basically, you're already winning the game. You got back your pawn, you keep attacking with strong pressure, and if he tries knight f3, trying to force your queen to move, you can be nice to your opponent and do what he wanted. Even if your opponent doesn't blunder, his position is already tough. You're attacking, you're about to capture this knight on c3. If not, if he defends it somehow, you want to simply castle, put your rook to the e-file and begin your attack. Knight e2 is one of the decent moves for white to defend this other knight on c3, and yet he drops this pawn on c4, which is no longer defended by his light square bishop. Now you have these two bishops putting strong pressure, plus your knight is still attacking this knight on c3. Again, white is somewhat in trouble. He may try queen a4 because it may look for a second like your pieces are somewhat loose and he may hope to capture one of them, but knight c6 keeps it under control. You block the check and you guard the bishop. Basically, your idea now is to attack this knight on c3. You can eliminate the defender first and then capture that one on c3 and win the game. In one game, white tried to play d5, maybe to counterattack, but black just keeps horsing around. The queen doesn't have many squares to go to. Knight d3, another unpleasant surprise, the king is in check. And after king d2, you've got this fantastic move, queen takes d5. The knight cannot capture it because it's pinned. Otherwise, you're about to keep attacking. And after king to c2, you've got another Trojan horse, sacrificing the knight and finishing the game. Once again, we're talking about the line pawn c4, used by people who reuse a t-back 5 times. Here they want to hold on to their extra pawn, but after that they fall behind in development, getting you a lot of opportunities for your early attack. And after d4, bishop b4 check, as we have seen, covering with the knight has its downsides. After knight e4, you just continue your attack. Instead, they may try bishop d2, covering their king that way, and offering you to trade bishops, but we know that to take is a mistake. We're not going to be that simple. You're going to play queen e7, defending your bishop and also preparing to develop your pieces. Still, your opponent may wish to play queen a4 with a doubled attack with a check, hoping that maybe he can grab your bishop. In this position, most players play knight to c6, missing a rare opportunity to counter their check by a counter check that wins the game. Let's say your opponent does not follow the script, he does not play queen a4 check, he instead simply trades on b4. Well, his king is still in check, plus you're also potentially threatening this pawn, maybe the other one, therefore queen d2 is the move they're going to play, offering you to trade, but once again we're going to follow the rule to take is a mistake. You develop your knight and guard the queen simultaneously. If he trades there, good for you, your knight will advance forward and create threats. If he tries d5 with a double attack, as always, we have some unpleasant surprises for your opponent. You simply castle, ignoring him and beating his pawn. Finally, if he wishes to somehow reduce the pressure, now your knight comes forward, threatening fork. He needs to do something about that. If knight a3 to cover that square so that you cannot fork him, now you can get your bishop out of danger, getting ready to attack his king. And even in an endgame, it's still very uncomfortable for him. And in fact, here he just loses the game. You capitalize on the pin, attack this bishop, and white is defenseless. After knight d4, you can play the Sicilian defense, basically pawn c5. That, in this case, wins the game. You chase away this knight, but the knight cannot move because then he's going to drop the bishop. And even if your opponent is familiar with the en passant capture, it is not going to help because in this case, he drops this knight on d4 and then the bishop. If you want to know a similarly great attacking opening for white, check out this video. It's really one of my favorite openings. And if you want to level up your positional understanding, which is the core of chess, check out this free masterclass and keep crushing it.